Army nurse vanished in 1942. 40 years later, an old photo exposes her dark truth. Salerno, southern Italy, 02, October 1942, 02, 17 hours. The 95th Evacuation Hospital. A sprawl of khaki canvas pitched behind a shelled-out citrus grove was running on morphine fumes and dim blackout lanterns when 2nd Lieutenant Helen Brooks, U.S. Army Nurse Corps, stepped outside her ward and vanished. One moment she was logging morphine doses beside triage tent C. The next, a corporal on night patrol reported hearing a truck gear grind away toward the hills. In the morning, the ward roster showed 11 amputees, 6 morphine syringes, and 1 missing lieutenant. The War Department cabled Washington that same week. Brooks, Helen MLTANC, presumed deserted under enemy influence. Investigation pending. 8 months later, the official story hardened. Brooks had been executed by German field police for collaboration. Her photograph was removed from the 95th's Wall of Honor, her name excised from promotion rolls, and a slim, brutal telegram reached her mother's farmhouse in Ashe County, North Carolina. For 40 years, nothing about that night changed until one humid evening in July 1982, inside an air-conditioned archive room at Fort Bragg. Captain Sarah Brooks, Helen's granddaughter, 30 years old, trauma nurse, 82nd Airborne Medical Detachment, was combing microfilm for a master's thesis on field hospital doctrine. She cracked open a misfiled manila envelope stamped Historical Review, Italy 1942, and froze. Inside lay a single 4x6 black and white print. It showed her grandmother unmistakable helmet, pushed back Red Cross brassard, bright against mud-spattered sleeve, standing outside a bombed Baroque church. Beside her, 3 men in pristine Wehrmacht tunics smiled for the camera. No ropes, no guards, no fear in Helen's eyes, just a half-crooked grin that Sarah had seen once in a surviving family portrait. Scrawled on the reverse in pencil, Monte Cassino Sector, Nov 1842, HBW's contacts, 3 weeks after the Army claimed Helen had died. That single contradiction hit Sarah harder than any incoming round she'd patched up in Grenada. She digitized the image, slipped the original back, and walked out into the damp Carolina night with sweat prickling under her uniform. The Army had lied to her family, maybe to the country. She told herself it was academic curiosity, nothing more. But the truth felt sharper. She was tired of her family name being whispered like a curse at every Brooks reunion. Salerno in 42 was no place for subtle disappearances. Casualty reports bled across radio nets. Every dog tag lost was a statistic logged by S1 clerks. Yet the Army's own Board of Inquiry produced only a 3-page file, no trace. Presumed voluntary defection. Case closed. Voluntary Helen's last diary entry, preserved in a footlocker, now in Sarah's attic, spoke of home by Christmas if Jerry's 88s don't get me. The male officers who wrote those lines never bothered explaining why a well-liked Appalachian nurse would stroll past 2 companies of MPs and hop a ride with the enemy. But to small-town North Carolina, the official stain was enough. Her wedding photo disappeared from the mantel. Her medal's Bronze Star ribbon, European campaign ribbon with arrowhead, were left in a cigar box no one opened after 1943. Sarah grew up on aftershocks of that shame. Grade school classmates repeated rumors they heard from grandparents. Traitor nurse ran off with a Nazi captain. Her father drank himself silent whenever 1942 came up. By the time Sarah pinned her own lieutenant bars, the family myth felt like an itch under dress blues. Now in 1982, she held proof that myth was wrong. Helen alive, smiling apparently undercover with German personnel, weeks after her recorded death. Logic screamed espionage, not betrayal. But logic also said somebody powerful had buried the file so deep, a random thesis hunt nearly missed it. For American soldiers, southern Italy that autumn was a cauldron of dust, citrus smoke, and languages, Calabrian dialects, mingling with Brooklyn Yiddish, Texan drawls, and Cleveland Polish. Frontline medics called the region the Bloody Boot Heel. German Fallschirmjäger units clung to ridgelines above the Volturno. Partisan bands slipped messages in wine bottles, floated down creek beds. Amid this chaos, the 95th Evac spent as much time negotiating with local priests for church space as they did triaging shrapnel wounds. A nurse could move with relative freedom. White Red Cross brassards were respected by both Allied MPs and usually by Axis patrols under the Geneva Convention. That freedom made medical staff perfect couriers for the fledgling Office of Strategic Services, the OSS. They carried morphine, yes, but also microfilm tucked inside ampule trays, folded maps beneath surgical gowns. If Helen Brooks had stepped into that shadow world, her disappearance suddenly made lethal sense. Field hospitals were porous. One whispered accusation of fraternization could become a death sentence delivered by friendly firing squad or enemy bullets, whichever found her first. Sarah knew the procedure. If Helen had been reassigned to intelligence work, her personnel file would be flagged, classified. The National Personnel Records Center in St. Louis confirmed exactly that, file sealed by Military Intelligence 1943. No release without Pentagon clearance. Nurses' files simply weren't sealed unless they contained something explosive. Within a week, Sarah's safe apartment off Yadkin Road filled with photocopies, after-action reports, Red Cross rosters, Signal Corps traffic logs. A pattern emerged between September 25th and October 3rd, 1942. The 95th handled an unusual number of wounded German POWs men captured under suspiciously light guard. Some were whisked away by plainclothes liaison officers and never logged again. Helen's name appears last on the duty roster, the night before those transfers stopped. On WWII October, an OSS cable from Bari to Algiers mentions Nurse Nightingale package, compromised initiate red taper. Sarah had to look up the code in a declassified glossary field asset, compromised extraction or termination pending. Who terminated whom was still the question. Sarah's research unfolded like a classic cold case beloved by true crime buffs in Yankee sports bars, motive a covert supply chain, moving wounded POWs under guise of humanitarian care. Means a nurse with medical clearance and a Jeep pass could ferry messages past checkpoints. Opportunity Italy's fractured front offered a dozen dark roads where witnesses vanished. Every cross-reference Sarah ran deepened the mystery. The GI who signed Helen's last morphine ledger, Sergeant Thomas Murphy, was later decorated by OSS under an alias. The truck driver on guard that night died in 1946 when his pickup accidentally plunged off Blue Ridge Parkway, case unsolved. Names resurfaced in Senate paperclip hearings, then disappeared again beneath black ink. For a male audience raised on 12 O'Clock High and Band of Brothers, the geography is tactile, mud-slick olive-drab trucks grinding up mule paths. The smell of burned olive oil mixing with cordite, a nurse squinting at morphine vials while an 88mm shell whistles overhead. This isn't gothic romance, it's a missing person dossier, bolted to combat boots and Regulation K rations. 2 days after Sarah copied the photograph, someone jimmied her apartment lock. Military police found no prints, but her thesis folders had been photographed, pages subtly out of order, negatives missing. The message was clear: stop digging. Instead, Sarah doubled down. She cold-called retired OSS officers, sidestepped chain of command, met an old codebreaker named Kowalski in a smoke-choked VFW hall. He examined the Monte Cassino photo under a jeweler's loupe and whispered a name that hadn't appeared in any official file. Klaus Richter, Abwehr Intelligence, went missing, 45. Some say he's stateside. If Richter survived under a new identity, he might be the last man alive who knew why Helen Brooks walked out of Triage Tent C that October night, and why the U.S. Army erased her. A decorated frontline nurse disappears in Salerno, 1942, officially branded a traitor. 40 years later, her granddaughter discovers a photograph, proving Helen lived weeks past her alleged execution, apparently embedded with German troops. Classified files, a sealed personnel jacket, and a chain of suspicious deaths hint at a larger intelligence operation gone very wrong. Unseen forces are already moving to silence Captain Sarah Brooks before she can exhume a secret older than the Cold War. Sarah's first stop was the National Personnel Records Center in suburban St. Louis, a squat 1950s concrete cube that looked more like a bomb shelter than the nation's military memory bank. Outside July, heat shimmered on acres of parking lot. Inside, the air smelled of microfilm copy toner and cafeteria coffee burnt to motor oil strength. She had rehearsed her cover story doctoral candidate researching wartime logistics. But the moment the archivist wheeled out Helen Brooks's carton on a squeaking metal trolley, that plan disintegrated. The folder stamped, classified MI 23 Feb 43, was wrapped in red tape, literal, cloth tape, crimson as dried blood, cross-stitched so tightly the cardboard bowed inward. Nothing else in the box, just that one thin dossier, leashing 75 pounds of paperwork in place. Who can authorize removal? Only the Department of the Army, ma'am, the clerk said, lowering his voice as if the walls carried rumors. Same directive that sealed Patton's spy cables. Most folks don't even know it exists. When Sarah pressed, he slid a Xerox across the counter. It was a one-page memo dated 27 October 1943, countersigned by a name she'd never seen, Lieutenant James Morrison, OSS G2 liaison. His scrawl added a single-line subject transferred to Project Switchback. File sealed indefinitely. Switchback. She copied the page, slipped it into her purse, and thanked the clerk. Outside, cicadas screamed in the cottonwoods, but a chill pooled in her stomach. Morrison's name meant something her late grandfather had once ranted after too many bourbons about Morrison's damned mule track. At the time, Sarah chalked it up to veterans' guilt. Now it felt like the missing cog in a covert gearbox. Back in North Carolina, Sarah hunted down the only Morrison still listed in Ashe County, Frank Morrison, 82, retired telegrapher. She found him on his front porch, sipping Pabst, and listening to the Cardinals game crackle through an AM radio. A .38 revolver rested on the wicker table beside his oxygen tank, mountain hospitality, in a single tableau. Lieutenant Brooks's granddaughter, he rasped when she introduced herself, eyes narrowing the way old men squint at enemy armor. Thought y'all would come sooner. Frank's living room was a shrine to the OSS yellowed maps, code wheels, a framed first edition simple sabotage field manual. Over strong instant coffee, he unspooled a story that bled into dusk. In late 42, the OSS drafted select frontline medics into Project Switchback, a deception pipeline that funneled doctored intel to German field commands. Each courier code-named after Appalachian trails carried false casualty tallies, forged orders, or sick POWs whose bandages hid microfilm. Helen, call-sign Spruce Pine, was the only nurse brave or foolish enough to run the Salerno leg alone. She never defected, Frank said, voice cracking. She saved POWs, smuggled them through Jerry roadblocks like a Sunday picnic. But somebody sold her out. Who? Klaus Richter. Abwehr liaison, fancy boots, William and Mary English. Yanks scooped him near Monte Cassino in 45, then poof witness, protection courtesy of Operation Paperclip. Frank jabbed a nicotine-stained finger toward a dusty filing cabinet. Find Richter, you'll find who silenced your grandma. He levered himself up, shuffled to the cabinet, and pulled a manila envelope labeled R files. Inside, a grainy mugshot of a 30-year-old German officer haircut, sharp as a bayonet, a copied manifest for SS Vulcania New York arrival 1947, and a redacted naturalization form granting citizenship to one Carl Brennan, Fayetteville, NC. Sarah's pulse hammered. She'd shaken that hand Brennan funded the new burn unit at Fort Bragg Hospital last year. The plaque bore a pious inscription in gratitude to those who heal the broken soldier. 48 hours later, Sarah found her apartment door hanging on one hinge. Every drawer had been upended, toothpaste squirted like silly string across paperwork, a vandal's flourish meant to look random. Yet the burglar knew precisely what to steal Frank's R files. The only thing they missed was the Monte Casino photo now locked inside Sarah's ankle holster boot. Military police chalked it up to local punks. Sarah didn't buy it. She pulled the .380 she seldom fired from the sock drawer and cleaned it while Johnny Cash hissed from the radio music her father used to play when anger outpaced words. That night her phone rang at 02:11 a.m., static, then a man's voice thick with southern politeness overlaid on clipped German vowels. "You're chasing ghosts, Captain. Let the dead stay buried and you'll live longer." Click. She didn't sleep after that. The next day she met Frank at Shorty's Smokehouse, a joint where pitmasters pulled pork since Truman was president. Country music thumped. Ceiling fans turned smoky air. Every table hosted men in high-vis work shirts and veterans' ball caps. Exactly the camouflage they needed. Frank looked worse, hands trembling, eyes watering from more than hickory smoke. They tossed my cabin, took everything, even Mary's photo albums. Mary, his wife, had died 2 Christmases ago. Sarah slid him a fresh copy set she'd made at Kinko's. "You still have your mind, Frank. That's harder to steal." He straightened, wiped his face with a diner napkin, and produced a scrap torn from a spiral pad. Bank Schweitz Union Zurich. Account 847-239-1156. Transfers every quarter 1947 present. Follow the money, he whispered. It'll point right at Brennan. Brennan owned half of Cumberland County construction firms, truck depots, and NASCAR sponsorship. Patriotic billboards showed his silver fox smile above slogans like "Building Tomorrow's Forts Today." Yet no public biography reached before 1947, just arrived in the Carolinas after service overseas. Sarah parked outside Brennan's flagship office, a glass box overlooking the Cape Fear River, and watched secretaries in shoulder-padded blouses line up at lunchtime food trucks. Brennan emerged precisely at 12:30, flanked by 2 bodyguards in aviator shades. The resemblance to the 1945 mugshot was uncanny, same steel-blue stare temple veins, pulsing like live wire. She tailed his Lincoln to a country club gate, but couldn't breach the security kiosk without a tea time. Instead, she documented every turn, every license plate, every vendor's logo on the delivery dock. Spycraft 101 taught in a war that technically never ended. That evening, the Fayetteville Observer headline spun through the printing press, "Local Philanthropist Funds Veterans Housing." Sarah clipped the article, highlighted Brennan's quote, "We owe everything to the boys who bled for freedom," and wondered how many of those boys he'd sent to early graves. At dawn, she hiked to the Confederate cemetery, where Helen's unadorned stone leaned beneath draping Spanish moss. Frank joined Kane, tapping gravel breath fogging in the cool mountain air. They poured cheap bourbon on the soil Helen liked to sip before Sunday sermons, family legend said, and made a pact. If either of them went missing, the other would mail duplicates of every document to the Washington Post and Senator Sam Nunn's oversight office. Insurance. Frank pressed a dog-eared topo map into Sarah's palm. "X marks Brennan's hunting lodge," he said. "He disappears up there first weekend of every month. No bodyguards. Just bourbon and bear traps." Lightning flickered on the Blue Ridge horizon like artillery flashes, and fat southern raindrops drummed Helen's granite. Sarah tucked the map into her jacket and whispered, "I'll bring the truth home." The Blue Ridge in late August, smells of rain-wet hemlock and hot engine oil, exactly the scent clinging to Sarah's borrowed Forest Service Jeep as she rattled up a fire trail 2 counties west of Asheville. Brennan's lodge wasn't listed on any deed. Frank's map, drawn from memory after a 1956 poker game with a county surveyor, led her through switchbacks that rose from quaint cow pasture Americana into real wilderness, no cell bars, no power lines, no second chances. At 04:19, she killed the headlights, rolled the last 100 yards in neutral, and parked behind a fallen chestnut. The moon, half masked by thunderheads, threw just enough silver for night vision goggles to bloom green. She checked her kit Nikon F2 with black tape over the chrome micro-cassette recorder lockpicks, 2 spare magazines for the Beretta. No backup, she reminded herself. Frank's heart wouldn't survive a mountain firefight, and the MPs still filed her earlier break-in as domestic vandalism. Brennan's retreat squatted on a ridge like a frontier blockhouse, upgraded by a Fortune 500 bonus. Hand-hewn logs, satellite dish, bank vault, safe door, set into fieldstone chimney, everything reeked of curated rustic masculinity. The perimeter was wired with deer cams and cheap infrared tripwires a prep school hacker could bypass. Sarah clipped the power leads with EMT shears and stepped across the veranda. Inside smelled of cedar cigar smoke and a top-shelf, Scotch-only General's drink on someone else's dime. Trophy mounts lined the walls. Elk boar, a Himalayan tar animals shot on continents Brennan swore he liberated with construction jobs. The study door was locked with a Schlage keypad. She punched the birth date Brennan bragged about in every Rotary Club speech, 04/05/1920, beep green light. Vanity kills, she thought. File drawers slid open on whisper rails. First folder, Switchback Financial. Swiss deposit slips, quarter lies, from 1947 to spring 82, each signed KR, but notarized by an American banker already dead 20 years. She photographed fast-flipping pages while recorder hissed. Next drawer held microfilm canisters labeled Italian POW Intercepts, Casino. She pocketed 3 at random. The third drawer stuck halfway. She yanked, metal screeched. A hidden rail released, revealing a velvet-lined cavity no larger than a shoebox. Inside a Colt .32, a vial of digitalis, and a single Polaroid Helen Brooks bound to a wooden chair, eyes swollen but defiant. The timestamp in white margin read, 11:42 for Brennan. Sarah's stomach iced over. The photo wasn't grainy propaganda. It was trophy proof of capture, meant as leverage or macabre souvenir. She slipped it into her shirt pocket, heart drum roll. Loud in the quiet cabin, and turned to leave. Crunch of gravel outside. Headlights washed through the window panes. Brennan's Lincoln. No engine note, too throaty, a Chevy C10 pickup. Voices, 2 men, local drawl, mixing with clipped German consonants that lingered despite 4 decades of country club vowels. Brennan and a guest. No time for windows. Sarah eased into a pantry, cracked the door. Brennan lumbered past silhouette broad as an oak stump, followed by a thinner man carrying a slim briefcase handcuffed to his wrist. They spoke about final Zurich transfer and D.C. hearings heating up. Contingency plan rolling tonight. The briefcase man called Brennan Herr Oberst. They entered the study. Sarah counted heartbeats, then slid from the pantry and crossed the hall toward the back porch. A board creaked. Brennan barked, "Who's there?" Footsteps thundered. She dove through a screen door, rolled off the porch into rhododendron. Lost the Nikon, but kept the Polaroid. Shots cracked, muzzle flash split the dark, but Brennan fired wild. Bourbon never helped accuracy. Sarah sprinted down slope branches, whipping her face until headlights slashed between trunks ahead. Another vehicle idling where she'd hidden the Jeep black Suburban GOV plates. Great, she thought, company men. 3 silhouettes moved with textbook bounding Overwatch M4s, NVGs, radio mics taped to throats. Not Brennan's rent-a-cops, federal. She raised empty hands and stepped into the open. "Captain Sarah Brooks," she whispered, voice ragged, unarmed. "I have evidence." A flashlight blinded her. "Down on your knees, ma'am." Back seat of the Suburban smelled of wet nylon and bureaucratic menace. The man opposite her crew, cut 40-ish bureau windbreaker, introduced himself with badge flash. Special Agent Daniel Patterson, FBI Counter Intel. "We've tailed Brennan for months," he said, thumb flicking through the rolls of film she'd hidden in her jacket. "You just tripped our endgame, Captain." Care to explain? Sarah played the recording of Brennan's Zurich talk, showed the Polaroid. Patterson's expression shifted from skeptical to something colder. "Digitalis," he muttered, pocketing the vial. "Matches tox-screen anomalies in 3 cold cases linked to Brennan's circle." He radioed an order. Agents in woodland camo ghosted upslope. Automatic fire crackled. Minutes later, comms reported target secure. Sarah pictured Brennan face down in trophy room sawdust, 40 years of false patriotism sluicing between floorboards. Relief warred with dread. Bagging Brennan might trigger agency cleanups far above Patterson's pay grade. Dawn painted the ridge blood orange as Patterson drove her to a remote airstrip where a charcoal Learjet idled. Inside waited 2 men in subdued CIA lapel pins. "We're flying to Langley," Patterson said. "You'll brief a joint task force, FBI, Army, CID, House Intel Council. Brennan's dead or in cuffs. Now we need your grandmother's side of Switchback before the agency starts shredding." Sarah's gaze locked on the Langley rep's smiles, thin as piano wire. Why would I trust them? Because Patterson answered, sliding a vanilla folder across the tray table. "They're under the same gun. Senate hearings open next month. They either cooperate or take the fall." Inside the folder lay a freshly typed immunity agreement covering every document Sarah had duplicated, plus witness protection terms for Frank. The carrot looked shiny, the stick was unspoken refuse, and she'd drown in legal molasses. She stared out the oval window at ridgelines dissolving beneath cloud. Helen never got this choice, she thought. She fought alone until Richter's bullet found her. Sarah was no martyr. She intended to win. She clicked a pen, signed the line above her rank, and slid the papers back. "I talk on 2 conditions," she said. 1, Frank Morrison gets federal medical care, no questions. 2, my grandmother receives full military honors, name-cleared Bronze Star, reinstated. The CIA lawyer nodded like a blackjack dealer counting chips. Patterson extended a hand. "Deal, Captain." Engines roared. Appalachia shrank to green corrugations. Sarah adjusted the seatbelt across bruised ribs, tucked Helen's Polaroid inside her notebook, and exhaled for the first time in hours. Part of her wanted to mourn Brennan's victims, including the bright-eyed nurse he'd broken in a stone cellar near Casino. Another part felt the electric hum of battle lines moving. Brennan was only one domino. Project Switchback had 20 more beneficiaries still cashing blood-stained dividends. Langley awaited with coffee fluorescents and lawyers trained in national security redactions. Fine. Sarah had photographs, microfilm, and a soldier's stubbornness. The truth wasn't a corpse to be buried. It was a fuse, and she had just lit the next segment. Langley keeps its conference suites at 65 degrees year-round, a temperature calibrated, someone once joked, to preserve both documents and deniability. Sarah sat at the far end of a walnut table, longer than most bowling lanes. Fluorescent tubes hummed overhead. The walls were bare except for a single Seal Eagle shield, 13 stars watching every syllable. Around her, a Pentagon lieutenant colonel from Army G2, 2 House intelligence lawyers, an FBI audio tech, and Deputy Director Mark Eldridge. Agency Silverback Princeton class ring flashing when he pinched his bridge. A red tea light on the recorder glowed like a sniper dot. "Let's begin," Eldridge said, voice molasses slow Carolina, yet precise as a slide rule. "Captain Brooks describe spruce pine in your grandmother's handwriting." Sarah slid the Monte Cassino photo across the gloss. Spruce pine was Helen's call sign under Project Switchback. She moved doctored casualty tags and exfil POWs disguised as medevacs. Everything she did ran through Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison, OSS liaison, your predecessor's predecessor. A lawyer cleared her throat. "Captain, these canisters you seized, do they contain classified Abwehr traffic?" "Partly," Sarah said. "Mostly they're Switchback accounting, whose intel was sold, who paid the bill. One reel links Brennan's deposits to Zurich Union Bank across 4 decades. Murmur. Pens scratched. Eldridge steepled fingers. Captain, you realize releasing that film unchecked could compromise still valid human sources. Valid or convenient, Sarah countered. My grandmother was tortured and shot so someone could keep collecting Swiss francs. I'm out of patience for euphemisms. The FBI tech pushed a laptop forward. Brennan's Mountain Lodge hard drive, already imaged, filled the screen-scanned ledgers, a Friends of Freedom donor list, and a PDF named Phoenix Roster. Eldridge tapped the file. This is why you're here. 18 living paperclip assets, all drawing stipends for historical consulting. Some are frail scientists. 3 are ex-Abwehr like Brennan. They know tradecraft addresses families of field agents. If the roster leaks Moscow or Tehran, we'll snatch them before we even gas up. The G2 colonel cut in. With respect, sir, my office can detain all 18 by Friday. Sure, Eldridge said. And next month we testify why Army CID black-bagged a 95-year-old astrophysicist who helped put Apollo on the moon. Optics matter. Sarah leaned forward. So we let them coast until their hearts quit. That's the play. Number. Eldridge slid a slim binder toward her OP resolution. We fold them under one handler you. You've got medical creds covered to travel personal stake. Offer exit deals, sealed depositions, remote safe houses. Any holdouts we neutralize quietly. Congress gets a victory headline, you get your grandmother's honors, and the Republic skips another scandal. It was the carrot Patterson promised, polished now by marble hallways. Sarah thumbed pages, budget lines, overseas clinics, a fresh GS-15 pay grade. She felt the room tilt, the smell of politics mixing with copier ozone. The House Counsel spoke. Captain, if you refuse, we can subpoena your evidence. After that chain of custody moves out of your hands, meaning cooperate or watch truth drown in procedural quicksand. Sarah pictured Helen in that chair, bruised yet unbroken. She thought about Frank oxygen tube hissing beside VA bed, praying Washington wouldn't wash him out as collateral. And she thought about men like Brennan golf clap patriots whose secret pensions were financed by war dead. She closed the binder. I have terms. Eldridge's eyebrow arched. State them. 1 public exoneration ceremony for Helen Brooks at Arlington, full honors televised. 2 Frank Morrison's medical coverage tier 1. 3 an independent inspector general team auditing every switchback dollar from 1945 till today. Report delivered to the same committee that grilled Ollie North. And 4 she let the silence stretch. I pick my own field team. No ghosts with license to freelance assassinations. The table was quiet enough to hear the HVAC click. Eldridge glanced at the lawyers, then nodded once. Conditional on committee sign-off, agreed. Sarah signed the operations NDA with a pen heavier than it looked. As she wrote, Eldridge slid a final photo under her wrist, a cane-thin man in linen, sipping espresso outside a seaside villa. Target 1, Eldridge said. Real name, Friedrich Adler. Paperclip chemist turned NATO advisor. Lives in Key West 6 months a year. You leave tomorrow. Sarah pocketed the picture. Beneath her fatigue, a live-wire clarity flared the hunt was on, but this time she set the rules. Outside dawn washed gray over Langley's parking lot. Patterson waited by a bureau sedan, takeaway coffee in each hand. Well, she sipped, grimaced too bitter, just like gear oil Fort Bragg brew. They gave me a badge, she said, and a leash long enough to hang every one of them if they lie. She looked east, where sunrise burned the Potomac haze. Let's see who blinks first. Key West, September 1982. Smell of tarpon guts and suntan oil draped Duval Street as tourists chased margaritas past pastel bungalows. Sarah landed in civilian khakis and Ray-Ban's cover legend CDC epidemiologist tracking dengue. Her hand-picked team trailed behind Corporal Luis de Soto, Army medic, fluent in Spanish Zero Black Ops baggage, and Special Agent Dinah Lau, FBI handwriting savant. Patterson's quiet concession. Shadowing them, uninvited, walked Vic Parker, CIA problem solver, whose smile never met his eyes. Target lived 2 miles away, on Waddell Avenue, a conch-style cottage hidden by bougainvillea. Friedrich Adler, alias Freddie Adler, retired MIT chemist widower, jogged the seawall every dawn, tanned scarecrow in Adidas shorts. Eldridge's file painted him benign. OSS footnotes whispered he'd refined Tab and G series nerve agents before defecting. Sarah's job extract a deposition, freeze his accounts, offer witness protection. Parker's job, unstated, was insurance if Adler balked. Morning 1. Sarah tailed Adler's run-logging cadence inhaler, used 2 puffs at mile 2, and a subtle limp on left push-off good, to know if sprint turned ugly. Lau sifted garbage pickup pharmacy receipts for beta blockers, no evidence of visitors. DeSoto mapped ER routes. Key West had one small hospital, closer to tourist traps than Adler's porch. That night, Parker suggested easier closure. He tapped a pill bottle. Digitalis. Cardiac arrest on a hot jog, natural as Florida humidity. Sarah stared him down. We're not repeating Brennan's playbook. Parker's laugh tinked like ice in bar glass. Captain, sometimes mercy looks like pragmatism. Day 3. Aero 700, Sarah intercepted Adler. Post-run outside Conch Fizz Cafe, a quiet joint where shrimp and grits cost less than gossip. Dr. Adler. She offered a CDC badge and a smile. Mind answering questions about Gulf Coast pathogens. He blinked behind bifocals, nostrils flaring at her accent. North Carolina vowels just like nurses he once knew in 1942. He nodded slowly. Over coffee, maybe. Inside ceiling fans chopped moist air. Adler sipped black brew, hands trembling. Parkinson's, not fear. Sarah eased the trap. You consulted for NATO labs in 59 nerve agent countermeasures. We're re-evaluating exposure protocols. Adler's gaze sharpened. Old intellect surfaced. You don't carry yourself like epidemiology, Fräulein. Too steady. He set the mug down. Tell Langley I kept my part of the bargain. Sarah slid the Monte Casino snapshot across the table. So did she, until someone sold her out. Adler's face drained. Spruce pine, he whispered. He spoke in low, German-streaked English. Yes, he'd forwarded Helen's microfilm to OSS stations. Yes, Richter discovered the channel. Yes, Adler warned an American handler codenamed Peregrine, but the handler suppressed the alert, choosing to protect future income streams. Name, Sarah demanded. Adler shut his eyes. My immunity promised no reprisals. Sarah tapped a cassette recorder. Witness deposition. No reprisals, just the record. Before Adler could answer, glass shattered. Parker stormed in, Beretta suppressed. Deposition's over. Tourists screamed. Lau tackled a waitress. DeSoto flipped a table for cover. Parker fired twice. Silenced pops aiming at Adler. Sarah kicked Parker's wrist. Shot went wild, crunching tiki bar bottles. Adler collapsed not from bullets but heart strain. Sirens wailed. Parker fled out the kitchen into sunset glare. Sarah knelt, checked pulse thready but present. DeSoto jammed IV saline. Lau pocketed the recorder. EMS sped toward Lower Keys Medical Center. Adler breathed oxygen, whispering through mask. Peregrine. Real name? Call James. Vent alarm drowned the rest. Sarah gripped his hand. Hold on, Doc. Outside the ambulance door, Patterson's sedan fishtailed into gravel, lights off. He jumped aboard. Parker's gone rogue. Headquarters claims coordination error. Sarah met Patterson's stare. Tell Eldridge one more error and the next tape hits every newsroom from Miami to Anchorage. Patterson nodded, wiped sweat. Understood. As the ambulance rolled under flamingo pink dawn, Sarah realized her leash just snapped, and hunting Parker might be the only way left to keep her grandmother's justice alive. Lower Keys. Medical's ICU hummed like a hive. At Oro 312, Adler woke, eyes glass clear. Sarah leaned close. DeSoto rolled tape. Peregrine was Mark Eldridge, Adler rasped. He sold her. He sold all of us. Heart monitors spiked, then steadied. Confession secured. Patterson whisked the file to a dawn committee. Eldridge's resignation hit AP wire by lunch. A warrant shadowed it. Parker, cornered at a Marathon Key airstrip that night, chose a Glock over cuffs. FBI lights ended the sprint in 2 crisp shots. 1 month later, gray sky drizzled over Section 60 Arlington. A bugler sounded taps as an honor guard folded a flag trimmed in white. Lieutenant Helen M. Brooks, Valor and Sacrifice, Italy, 1942. Sarah accepted the triangle hands steady at last. Reporters shouted for comment. She offered none. Adler, frail but alive under martial escort, touched 2 fingers to his brow, a soldier's salute. Justice wasn't tidy, but it breathed, and Sarah's new orders, code-named Verdant Trail, awaited wheels up at dawn.